Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the Fireside chat where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today I'm super pleased to be joined by not only a very good friend but a very inspirational individual, Ton Christiaanse. Ton is the CEO and board member for Aviko Group. He's had over 25 years worth of experience working in over 25 different countries for some of the world's leading global FMCG brands. Ton has been responsible for over 20,000 members of staff during his career in many of his different businesses, and he's also managed revenues of over 4 billion. He's worked for leading businesses such as the likes of Chiquita, Aviko, Vion and also Sara Lee Group. Welcome to the show, Ton.
Thank you, Leila. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for coming to
sunny Manchester, as a matter of fact.
I know, the sun is out for you today, clearly, Ton, because it's usually raining here in Manchester.
I've heard that, yeah, but so far it's not true.
It's very good of you to travel all the way over to be here with us today. We feel very, very honoured. And it'd be great just to share with some of our listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with you as I am, just a little bit more about yourself and what you've been up to of late, some of the current projects that you've been doing, and a brief summary of how you came to find yourself at the helm of an international manufacturing business.
Yeah, well, I don't want to go through 25 or 30 years of CV, if you like, but I started at Unilever when I was relatively young after my international MBA. And then, I've climbed, as most people, the career ladder, if you like, in some of these larger companies that you've mentioned before, until roughly about 10 years ago when my career took slightly a different direction. And I ended up doing various roles, non-executive roles. I'm a chairman of a quality beef company up in Scotland, where I live with my family.
Oh, is that AK Stoddart?
That's AK Stoddart. It's a medium-sized company for Scottish, from a Scottish perspective, but it's a little company, if you like, from a UK or a European perspective. But I still, that's just one of my non-executive roles. But I still have the drive to be more an executive and work together with teams to really make a difference in a company or make a difference for a particular shareholder or an asset. So at the same time, while I have some of the non-executive and advisory roles, I work as an interim CEO at this particular moment for Aviko, but I've also worked for another number of other companies such as Brakes and Risio.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And the young Ton, if you don't mind me asking, did you always see yourself being in this kind of leadership position? How did this come about? Or was it something that was quite premeditated from the young Ton deciding what he wanted to do when he grew up and everything like this?
Well, I think the young Ton was a typical teenager that had no real idea what he wanted to do later in life. And when I did my international MBA, where I probably started to get some feeling for I want to travel the world, I want to work in different countries, I want to work with different cultures and different type of people. I just bumped into a Unilever executive and they hired me for my first management role, if you like, and sponsored me and supported me to follow that international MBA. And that was only the start of, as we said, 25, 30 years of international career where I've been roaming around, not just various type of countries, but also different organizations, different type of shareholders, and different cultures. But most of it in food and fast-moving consumer goods.
Mm-hmm. And talk to me a little bit about some of the key observations that you found, because obviously working across 25 plus different countries, that's quite some experience. And obviously being Dutch yourself, being here in the UK, being up in Scotland where I know you have a home, you must have experienced lots of different types of people from lots of different walks of life. It'd be great to hear about some of the stories and the things that you've come across on your travels internationally.
Yeah, well, there are quite a few stories that I can't share.
No, you can share those later, though.
The most interesting thing I would say is that by traveling around and doing the international type of roles, multinational type of roles, you are indeed exposed to the different type of culture that you can expect. And sometimes these are really stereotypes. You think that you know how the Finnish people are, you think that you know how the Italian people. And these stereotypes come from something, because they come from the fact that in general terms, those characteristics are really embedded in those countries and in those cultures. Where if you do just simple black and white, you know that in the northern part of Europe, people tend to plan a little bit more and look a little bit more ahead, whereas in the southern part of Europe, in general, people tend to be a little bit more, driven by the madness of the day. And of course, that is not every single individual. Of course, that's not every single company. But it is, that there are these sort of, issues that you can come across, and that makes it all the more interesting. Nothing is as great as having breakfast, very structured, a breakfast meeting in Stockholm, if you like, with people planned as you will, and then travel down south and be in Madrid and have your dinner at 10:30 at night and be the first in the restaurant, because it's a completely different culture and it's only a 2 hours flight. And that's fun, that's interesting, and the only way to learn about it is just by doing it and experience it, and getting, unfortunately, a little bit older.
And what about some of the marked differences between the UK and obviously the Netherlands? And arguably, without mentioning the B word, the UK is going through quite a lot of difficult times, I guess, at the moment. And, I guess that's quite difficult for a lot of people in Europe to kind of see in, what seemed to be such kind of a multicultural environment. Have you found any of the differences almost becoming more prominent? What have been the marked differences between the Dutch versus the UK way of working, perhaps?
Well, obviously, the Dutch and the UK way are the two ways that I know best. I've been in the UK for about 10 years now, and being born in Holland, although I've traveled and lived in different countries. Obviously, I am Dutch by birth, and probably also by style to a certain extent. And there are differences, whereas in the UK, I believe the management style is still more hierarchical. In Holland, in the style of management, it is more an equal type of environment where people tend to disagree with their boss rather than agree, and trying to find the conflict and find the conversation and the discussion to, in the end, come to the best possible team result, if you like. Whereas in the UK, in general, the style is a little bit more top-down. And I think you see it back in politics now as well, because we will not mention the B word, as you said before. But if there would have been a Nexit, if you like, and the Dutch would have decided to leave the European Union, for better or worse, next day, the first thing that would have happened would be that all the different parties, from the left and the right and everything in the middle, would come together and try to say, okay, this is what the Dutch want. They want to leave Europe. How are we going to solve this in the best possible way? And they would do that together, and some sort of a compromise would have been made, because that's their style. In the UK, I think politics are different. It's more about winning, and you see that also in the House, where you have one hand of in the room, you have the left, and then you have the right, and they're shouting and they're discussing and debating, and there is always the tendency that one party needs to win, and there needs to be some sort of a victory, and it's obviously much more difficult against that background to come to a compromise than it is in Holland, where obviously people are just trying to find what is the middle ground. That's, in this particular case, I think, a positive approach, but sometimes it can also lead to an awful lot of discussion and a lot of debate and no decisions. So it's not necessarily the case that one model is better than the other, it's just that they are different. And obviously it's again different if you go to Italy, it's different if you go to Germany or Eastern Europe or India, where I've been, or I was in China a few weeks ago. And I think the most important and interesting thing to understand is that it is different, but not necessarily better. every situation, every set of circumstances does ask for a different style, and there's good in all the different models, if you like.
You're completely right. I think being open-minded to different cultures is so important in the modern world that we live in. And clearly you've experienced lots of different types of cultures, and having an open mind has really helped you to get where you are today in international business.
Well, it does help. Initially it already helps you, obviously, to get a project or get a role, because they look at your background and see what sort of experience you have been able to accumulate. But you start recognizing patterns quicker. You start taking a little bit more time and listen and see how people react or what they want to bring to the conversation, which is not necessarily the nature of the Dutch. They tend to speak out very quickly. They tend to be very direct. It's just by having this experience of various environments that you're able to kind of modify your style a bit and adjust it then and where needed.
That's so interesting, because I agree with you when and obviously I know you well, and as a Dutch man, quite direct, but I love that. And a lot of Dutch individuals that I've met over my time, fantastic personality, often very direct, which I think is fantastic. But it is quite different to the UK, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always, although even within the UK there are differences, I tend to think that in Scotland it's a little bit more style-wise as we're used to in Holland, whereas in England it tends to be more indirect, in terms of the language people use, and in terms of decisions made often not in the meeting room itself, but in the corridors or before the meetings or after the meetings, and not necessarily based on the facts that are presented in a particular situation.
It's so interesting.
It is different. It is different.
It's so interesting that you say that, though. And obviously I'm British. I've been brought up in the UK, and I am very British, I think, by nature. But my husband, who's American, as you know, he always says the British never say what they mean, and so it's really difficult. They'll say one thing and mean another, and for other cultures I think that can be quite difficult.
Oh, it can be difficult because you can make mistakes by misinterpretation, especially in the language, because obviously English is the largest second language in the world, and therefore by default also the language people use in business. But that doesn't mean that everyone speaks English like the English. And one of the most famous examples in Holland is that people would go to England, would present something, try to sell a concept or a product, and the English would react and say, well, that's very interesting. And then they would go back and say, yeah, well, they're interested. They say it's an interesting concept, whereas by now you would know that it's just politeness, and they basically said, bugger off.
And when you said before, you kind of almost alluded to the fact that obviously as a seasoned leader, you've had to almost modify your style as you've taken up these various different challenges in various different organisations. Have you had to ever modify your Dutchness almost to be able to fit in, or have you ever found a situation where actually you thought, oh my goodness, everyone's quite different here, and struggled to embrace your authentic self?
Well, for instance, in my years my months in the project in India, which obviously, as expected, completely different from the way we operate in Western Europe. There's a lot of processes going on. We tend to go directly to the content, which is not necessarily what they're looking for. So you get all sort of reports, you get all sort of people joining you in meetings. It's completely unclear why they are there and what they want to present. But if you do one step back and you start understanding that they need to present themselves and need to present what they are doing in the company or in a particular role, and that's why they are there, not necessarily to contribute to that particular question that you would like to discuss at that very moment. Then you only start to understand why they are there. And then you also start understanding how you have to take the information that they present you with. And it's not necessarily always the content, it's then also the process. how do they present it, who presents it, what is the hierarchy, and you learn only by experience and seeing that happening. Whereas, in Holland we would say, we have now just spent an hour and a half and we haven't done anything. Why can't we just have an answer to this particular question? Well, obviously that's not what they want to hear at that moment in time. They just want to hear that you appreciate their efforts. And it is also a way to get things done, because again, one style is not better than the other, because if you go with a 100% sort of, classic Dutch style into that particular environment, you don't get anything done. So you fail, and that means that your style is not adequate, is not the right style for that set of circumstances. And what they do actually is, because they're very successful and they're able to build companies and they're able to make profit. So the worst thing you can do is thinking that you know better, or that your style is better because it tends to be direct or efficient. Well, you can be very direct, but if you make enemies with that, you don't achieve anything. So yes, probably when I was a little bit younger, I've made enough mistakes, not achieving what I wanted by being too direct, if you like. And just by getting older and traveling around, you start adjusting and modifying the way you operate.
That's really, really interesting to hear. So what you're saying actually, as a leader, it's really important to demonstrate that humility piece. And I think, I'm sure a number of individuals who've worked for you in the past really appreciate that honesty, because I think when leaders are willing to actually be genuinely authentic and honest and open and say, look, either I've got it wrong, or, this is what I thought when I was younger and that maybe wasn't the right way, that actually people start to open up such a lot more and really show their true colours, and it hopefully allows the team to be able to move forward with more direction.
Well, I think as a CEO or as a leader, if you like, you're a tool or a resource for your people, because you tend to be in a position where you manage people that are very much specializing on particular projects or topics or countries or product groups or whatever. Doesn't really matter. They know more about it than you. That's how it starts, because otherwise you would be in their role and not in the CEO role. So you have a general overview and you know more or less where the company wants to go to, but on their particular topic they are always more knowledgeable and more experienced. So you need to use these people, to help you, as a matter of fact, because you don't know. If you know better than your team members, then you have a big problem. So you have to assume they know better. And then you need to see what can I give to them to help them to make their job easier, or make them more successful, or let them grow, or make more profit, or whatever the objective is, because obviously that's different from company to company. And often the CEO then makes sure that they get the resources they need to be able to do a good job, and that can come from financing, because the CEO needs to go to the bank, or needs to go to the stock exchange, or whatever they need to go to build the trust and make sure that you're able to provide your team and provide your company with the tools and the assets they need to be successful. But you're there for them, as a matter of fact. And I think therefore this traditional way of drawing an organization chart, like a Christmas tree if you like, I think it should be the other way around, where the CEO is sort of on the bottom, and it's a resource where other people can build their job and their careers on. And just by turning it around in conversations I have sometimes with team members, you can make that clear. It's a very simple concept, as a matter of fact.
Wow, I love that. I've never heard that analogy before, turn the Christmas tree upside down. I think that's brilliant. And what you're describing there really is kind of this servant-led leadership, isn't it? It's actually, how can I serve you as a CEO? And I think that's something that is so refreshing. And it's very 21st century as leadership goes. I do think that the days of kind of CEOs and directors being in their ivory towers are long gone now. Is very much about this new modern way of working, which is how do we feel, how do we believe, trying to really bring the team together. And what better way to do that than to have that kind of level of genuine humility that says, look, how can I help you? I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's new, but it's also very old. Because if you look back, for instance, in a cooperative environment, where a number of people would come together and say, if we work together, we are able to get a better price for our products, or we get a better result in the market, and then the people are chosen then to represent them and to work actually for the team and for the group to get stuff organized and have at least one voice to customers or suppliers or banks or what. It's a model that is 100 years old. And you see, and it worked. It worked in many circumstances, and we've sort of drifted away from it. And now in the modern age, we kind of try to find these type of models back, and we organize groups of people. That cooperative thinking becomes more fashionable again. The same in financing, where you have people looking for crowdfunding and getting groups of people together to, for instance, procure goods or services together to have a better deal. So this sort of cooperative model becomes interesting again and becomes more in fashion. Probably driven by technology. It's easier to find, it's easier it's easier to organize yourselves based on technology. Consumers get together, employees come together. People that are just needed for one particular task or one particular project come together, and when that is done, they leave again and find another sort of circle where they work and perform. And obviously, all these groups and these teams, if you like, need leadership, and they will pick and choose the leadership that they can, that helps them to be successful. So I think it's more about that than leaders standing up and telling people what to do. Those days are over. But they were over 100 years ago as well. So we've just drifted away from this concept.
Gone around in this ecosystem almost. And whilst we're talking about the subject of people, of course, and of course the show is called Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, and I know that you've worked with a whole plethora of different individuals from all different walks of life. I wondered, what does diversity and inclusion really mean to you, Ton?
Yeah. Most of the time diversity is sort of translated into a gender discussion. I think it is much wider than that. So it's about different nationalities, different cultures, different background, different type of careers, different age brackets, languages, you name it. And gender is one of those elements. And I tend to believe that the bigger the mix is and the bigger the variety of a team within a culture of having the opportunity to listen to each other and see how you can approach a problem from a different angle. In the end, the result from that conversation will be much better than if it's just people with the very same background. But it can be as wide as you like. I think, for instance, age at the moment is very important. I would prefer to see much younger people now in the boardroom than just 50 plus people, and whether they are white or male or female or not. That's a topic, and I do know that is addressed by various people. But for me, it's also interesting that you have younger people in the particular board, because we live in a digital age. The world is changing very, very rapidly. Where change used to happen every decade, now it's sort of every 6 months. Brands, are coming up and they disappear very quickly, and we do see that in the US, for instance, where large, established, fast-moving consumer good brands that have been around for decades at this very moment are all suffering, and at the same time you see crowd-funded or just small new concepts popping up left, right, and center. And consumers can find them, and people want to know what type of company is producing it. They want to understand the ethics behind the company. They want to understand the shareholders behind this company. It's a completely new type of environment than where we used to work with the large 10 or 20 fast-moving consumer brands. And I'm not really sure if the older people, like myself, in the boardrooms all understand it. Intellectually they will, because most of these people, we have to assume, are intelligent enough to understand it. But do they really live it? Do they really experience it? I don't think they do, and therefore it's, I think, important that we get more younger people in the boardroom.
That's such an interesting concept, and I was only speaking about this actually yesterday with the leader of a charity who was saying they were doing a lot of work around trying to actually give voice to the youth, and it's such an interesting piece, the thought of having younger people in the boardroom. I think it's maybe not started to impact businesses yet, but like you say, it'd be wonderful if that happened. With the wonders of social media, you have, she's called Greta Thunberg, that incredible environmentalist kind of campaigner, and she's only 16 years old, and her videos have gone viral on YouTube, and you just think, wow.
Yeah, but we have to be careful that it's not a gimmick and that it's not a marketing tool, and in this particular case I think it becomes also some sort of phenomenon where indeed social media, and that might actually take it a bit out of perspective. I don't want a gimmick where we would say, you know, we have board meetings and we need a couple of, you know, teenagers, or we need, you know, what I just want is that it doesn't have to take 30 years for people with talent and experience to be in the end in that particular seat. So if I talk younger people on that type of, I talk still people with some experience and perspective, but that, you know, they could be, you know, 35, they could be 40, they need to be tech savvy, they need to really understand how today's life works. And
so it's not a case of tokenism, essentially.
Well, that's a bit of the thing that I have with, you know, the particular examples that you could come up with. That, you know, a vlogger here, or a blogger there, or a rapper here, or, you know, a young girl. Like, regardless whether they have, you know, the right ideas, or they can indeed mobilize, you know, people or the public into a certain direction, and probably even have a political influence. And that could be right, it could be wrong. That is a completely different conversation. But that's not really what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is where we have just, you know, regular companies that buy raw materials, turn them into products, sell them in the market in a way that the consumer nowadays expect, with the proper background, you know, from an ethical perspective, with an eye on sustainability, with an eye on the environment. Developing, you know, your staff, your people, and not just there for shareholders' value. And for that we need also more younger generations to get into. But to do it right, it should not just, you know, be youngsters with a dream. It should still be, you know, well-educated, well-experienced, well-travelled people. So
diversity across the board, essentially.
But younger, not not necessarily young.
That makes sense. And just moving into, before we run out of time for today, it'd be great just to do a couple of questions on what I'll call a lightning round, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds or thereabouts, because it's you, Ton, to answer. What is, a big question to start with, what's your secret to success?
Well, as I said earlier, you know, if I would know the secret and I would tell it, then everybody will be extremely successful. No, I think what you should, you know, you should be just true to yourself. You should just be very close. You can't, you know, set up a show or just perform. You just have to be true to yourself and do what you believe is right. And then I think success, in any shape or form, it depends a bit how you would define success, will come to you as a result. I don't believe there is a recipe, I don't believe there is a secret. I think if people would in generally do what they like, where their passion is, where they're good at, and stay close to themselves, they probably achieve as most as possible. And whether that is then success for others or not, that you know, that is for others to determine. But for that particular individual, if you can get the most out of it that is in you, that is success by all standards.
And what advice might you give to your younger self, if you could, right now?
I would definitely say travel the world. Maybe wait another year or so before you start your corporate career, because especially if you start working straight after university in a company like I did in Unilever, It's almost an extension, if you like, of your education. You learn a lot, but you learn techniques, you learn content, if you like, about marketing or sales or finance, and it's all very important, but you don't learn about the world. And if you have the opportunity to travel maybe for 1 or 2 years or do a few odd jobs, I think that is very important. And you will, at a later stage in life and in career, enjoy those lessons that you learn by experience. So I would say travel, look around, don't try to make a choice that you then will benefit from for the rest of your life, because life will take you somewhere. You don't know, you have no idea. But also embrace that uncertainty, because it's an adventure. Life is an adventure, and your career is an adventure.
I love that. Embrace uncertainty. It's very philosophical, actually, when talking about life. I think it's great, because you don't know what's around the corner, and actually it's amazing the chance meetings and things that can come around through a meeting that can lead to something else, and all of a sudden you're in a completely different job. It's quite phenomenal. And finally, who's inspired you most throughout your career, or even indeed throughout your life?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's one specific individual that I've read all the books about or have posters on the wall. But I tend to like the people that I disagree with, or to a certain extent even are my enemies, or nowadays political enemies. If you read the papers and you look at social media, it's much more interesting to see what these people have to say or have to add, and try to find the little bits and pieces where you agree with, because they are very, very valuable. And we are now in a day and age where people tend to surround themselves, especially driven by technology and social media, with people that have the same opinion as you have yourself. You tend to block the others you don't like, and you tend to follow the ones you do like. And constantly you have ideas or you have opinions, and you read about those and say, okay, my opinions are right and my ideas are right because everybody says so. But that's not true. It's because you only talk and follow to your friends, if you like. So I would say you learn most from the people you disagree with. Your enemy is indeed your friend.
That's a really interesting concept, and I have to say I've not heard that before. Thank you so much, Ton, for being with us today on the show. I really appreciate it, and some really interesting learnings have come out of this session. I really hope that everyone as well at home has learned a huge amount. I certainly have, and I'm just going to do a super brief summary, and obviously hope that we'll hear from people about any further questions.
Well, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure, and I hope that people take at least 1 or 2 nuggets out of this 30 minutes conversation.
I'm absolutely sure they will. So in summary, thank you very much for listening to the show today. I've been with Ton Christiaanse, CEO for Aviko Group. Lots of learnings from the show today, and hopefully you've all taken back a couple of nuggets of information to be inspired or motivated by. Some of the things that I've been jotting down here, the upside down Christmas tree for one, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I think that servant-led leadership is really important, and hopefully if you're working within a business and have not thought about this as perhaps a leader, to be really listening, to understanding, to opening your mind to the different types of individuals in the organisation and actually asking how you can help people. I think that's a great piece of advice from Ton. Also, the elements of being a honest and open leader. I think Ton's Dutchness clearly is very admirable, and actually I think sometimes, especially in the UK, we could do with a touch more of being a little bit more direct about things. So I think that's great, and also showing the humility as well as a leader to make sure that you can really learn and grow and develop into the future. So thank you very much for being with us today. You've been listening to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the Fireside Chat. We'll be with you on YouTube. You can find us on www.dialglobal.org/podcast. You'll also be able to find the audio version in addition, which we'll be putting on Apple, Spotify, and all of your favourite podcast channels. I'm Leila McKenzie, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.